What if the fate of Europe is now being sealed in secret meetings? Meetings where not a single European leader is allowed inside, and the destiny of an entire continent is being decided by outsiders. This is not a scene from a Cold War thriller, but a live reality unfolding behind closed doors today. It is a reality that carries echoes from some of the most consequential diplomatic betrayals of the past, yet feels even more urgent, because the world is changing faster than ever before. Imagine for a moment the Treaty of Tilsit, over 2 centuries ago, when Napoleon and Tsar Alexander met on a raft in the middle of the Niemen River, redrawing the map of Europe without the consent of the people who would be most affected. Or recall the Yalta Conference, when 3 world leaders, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin, divided up post-war Europe in a grand bargain, one that would shape the destinies of entire nations for generations to come. Today, the stakes feel just as high, but even more opaque, as decisions are made in hushed tones, far from the eyes and ears of those who will live with the consequences. Recently, a senior British general shattered decades of diplomatic pretense by declaring, in plain and uncompromising language, that Ukraine never had a real chance at victory, not now, and perhaps most shockingly, not from the very beginning. This was not an offhand remark or a momentary lapse in discipline. It was a carefully calculated signal, one that sent shockwaves through every Western capital. The old rules, it seems, are being discarded, and the balance of power in Europe is shifting beneath our feet as if we are standing on a tectonic fault line. Consider the image. While the battered streets of Pokrovsk reveal the raw, unfiltered face of modern conflict, smoke rising from broken buildings, families hiding in basements, rescue workers risking their lives to save just a handful of souls. Another drama is quietly being set in motion, far from the front lines. Former President Donald Trump and President Vladimir Putin are preparing for a summit in Budapest, a summit on European soil, yet with a conspicuous absence. Not a single European nation has been invited. The shock is not only in who is attending, but in who has been deliberately left out. For the first time in generations, since the end of the Second World War, when Europe's recovery and security were supposedly guaranteed by transatlantic unity, decisions that will shape the continent's borders, its future security architecture, and its very destiny, are being made without a European voice in the room. The old continent, which once dictated the course of world history, now finds itself on the outside looking in, as its leaders stand powerless, reduced to mere spectators. Ignore this story, and you risk missing the moment when the rules for your country's safety, your family's prosperity, and your entire way of life are being quietly rewritten. The stakes are nothing less than your future, and whether you, your children, and your grandchildren will have any say in it at all. But how did it come to this? How did Europe, once the center of gravity for global diplomacy, lose its seat at the table? And what does this new reality mean for its people, for their security, and for their role in a world that is suddenly being remade without their consent? The answer begins with a single, stunning admission, a sentence that will be debated for years to come. It started with a single sentence in London, but the echo reverberated through Paris, Berlin, Warsaw, and Brussels. In a quiet but public forum, a former British chief of staff announced, without the slightest hesitation, that victory for Ukraine is no longer possible. This was not a fringe opinion or a slip of the tongue. It was a deliberate message, voiced from the highest echelons of military and strategic thought, forcing what many had whispered in private into the harsh, inescapable light of day. This revelation was not a fluke, nor was it a moment of personal candor. It is part of a calculated shift, one designed to prepare Western societies for a sobering new reality. Retired NATO generals, no longer bound by the constraints of office, now speak openly about truths that their successors still bury behind polished public statements. The choreography is unmistakable. The narrative is being reset, and the public is being steered toward acceptance of the limits of Western power. From the earliest days of the conflict, Western support for Ukraine always fell short of what was necessary for decisive victory. Tanks, promised with great fanfare, arrived months late. Ammunition, desperately needed on the front lines, trickled in just fast enough to stave off disaster, but never enough to reverse the tide. Every commitment was hedged, every delivery delayed, as leaders balanced domestic politics with international reputation. They understood these limits from the very beginning, but only now are they guiding the public, step by careful step, to accept them. Why now? The answer lies in the cracks that are widening across Western unity. These cracks are visible not just in speeches, but in 1,000 small policy shifts. Debates over defense budgets, arguments over the cost of supporting a faraway war, and the growing fatigue of populations already battered by inflation, energy crises, and political polarization. Every blunt admission from a retired general chips away at the myth of inevitable Ukrainian triumph. In its place grows a new story. Lowered expectations, shifting priorities, and a resigned acceptance of hard boundaries that can no longer be denied. The real stakes, though, run much deeper than the fate of Ukraine. At risk is not only faith in leadership, but the public's very grasp of how policy is crafted, justified, and sometimes quietly abandoned. The consequences reach far beyond the daily headlines, threatening trust, security, and the shape of the future itself. Yet while these confessions dominate the news cycle, a more profound shift is happening out of sight, in rooms where the fate of entire continents is now quietly debated, and where Europe's voice is growing ever fainter. But the headlines in London are only one layer of this unfolding drama. In Budapest, an unprecedented meeting is about to redraw the lines of global power, with consequences that may echo for decades. Picture this: two power brokers, one a former American president, the other a Russian leader who has outlasted 4 American administrations, poised to redraw an entire continent's future. Meanwhile, Europe's own leaders linger outside, waiting for scraps. This is not an exaggeration. In Budapest, Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin plan to meet, and not a single European Union representative is allowed inside. It is a summit that threatens to seal the fate of tens of millions. Yet the people most affected, the citizens of Europe, are barred from the room. The meeting unfolds on European soil, but the continent itself is pointedly excluded. Even more remarkable, Hungary, a full European Union member, hosts the event while treating Brussels as a pariah. The symbolism could not be sharper. Viktor Orban, Hungary's prime minister, has evolved from controversial gadfly to crucial mediator. He is not just opening the doors, he is shaping the entire dialogue between two global titans, while the rest of Europe is left watching from the curb. To grasp the significance of this moment, recall the Munich Agreement in 1938, when Britain and France negotiated with Hitler over Czechoslovakia's fate, without including the Czechs themselves. History rarely repeats, but it often rhymes. Across Paris, Berlin, and Rome, frustration is quickly turning to alarm. The continent's capitals sense their leverage ebbing away, and with it, their ability to shape their own destinies. The old continent, once the undisputed epicenter of world power, is suddenly sidelined, unable even to control its own fate. This is not just about prestige or pride. The symbolism is sharp and painful. Europe, for centuries the chef, is now reduced to a mere waiter, locked out while others craft the menu. The rules of the game are changing, and Europe is missing from the conversation. The stakes are existential. Europe's influence, national sovereignty, and the very credibility of its institutions are on the line. If these are rewritten without European voices, what does Brussels have left to defend? As the diplomatic order is quietly rewritten in Budapest, a deeper crisis is erupting in Pokrovsk, a new form of warfare that reveals just how much the world has already shifted. The drama on the ground is no longer governed by the old rules of engagement. In Pokrovsk, the brutal, grinding conflict exposes the stakes for those caught in the crossfire, where the consequences of lost influence become terrifyingly real. The world's balance is tilting, and Europe stands on the edge, forced to confront a reality it did not choose. What happens when the old rules of war and diplomacy are swept aside? In Pokrovsk, the front line is no longer a clear line at all. It is a shattered city, picked apart by the relentless precision of 21st-century warfare. Drones circle overhead both day and night, their electric whine a constant reminder of unseen danger. Every movement is tracked, every building is a potential target, and the city itself is being erased, block by block, beneath a constant storm of surveillance and shelling. For civilians, escape has become almost unimaginable. There are stories of families trapped in basements for days on end, unable even to risk a dash for safety. Evacuation of the wounded sometimes takes several days, all while under threat from high-tech strikes. Supplies trickle in, but they are never enough. Trapped between ruthless negotiation and digital devastation, ordinary people are reduced to bargaining chips, caught in a conflict that no longer obeys the old boundaries of armies and treaties. As the West hesitates, Moscow grows ever more emboldened. Russian officials now declare that compromise is impossible. Only complete victory matters. This is not just talk. It is a strategy grounded in daily advances, each one further dissolving hopes that Europe or the United States will intervene in force. It is reminiscent of the slow-motion crises that have unfolded in regions like the Balkans or the Middle East, where diplomatic paralysis enabled years of suffering on the ground. Behind the headlines, governments are bracing for a generation-spanning standoff. New laws are quietly lowering draft ages, accelerating digital mobilization, and authorizing troop deployments far beyond home soil. Such rapid changes reveal a stark truth. Leaders are not expecting peace, but preparing for a future defined by protracted confrontation, a future that could remake entire societies, just as the World Wars and the Cold War did in the 20th century. Globally, the balance of power is tilting. The BRICS alliance grows stronger as dozens of countries in the global south turn away from Western demands, forging alliances based on expedience rather than shared values. The recent BRICS summit in Kazan, for instance, showcased a bloc that now counts more than 20 members, with countries from Africa, Asia, and Latin America queuing to join. Old partnerships fracture, replaced by fluid, short-term deals. Europe, once the anchor of diplomacy, is now battered by energy shortages and internal strife, increasingly excluded from decisions that will shape its own destiny. Most people risk missing how their own worlds are being refashioned. Laws, alliances, even military doctrines are being rewritten in real time, often hidden behind official statements or drowned out by everyday distractions. The transformation is monumental, yet it happens mostly in silence and shadows. It is like watching the slow shifting of tectonic plates, barely perceptible day to day, but capable of unleashing earthquakes that change the landscape forever. So what does all this mean for you? How can you prepare as power shifts and the rules themselves vanish? The next chapter reveals the pivotal moments and hidden negotiations shaping this new order. Moments that will decide who adapts and who is left behind. In a world where every headline is a calculated move, how do you avoid becoming a pawn on someone else's chessboard? This is not just a rhetorical question, it is a practical challenge, and one with real consequences for your daily life. Start by spotting the signs of orchestrated narratives. When top military officials or politicians make sudden, dramatic statements, ask, is this a genuine revelation or a maneuver designed to shape public opinion? Coordinated interviews, synchronized press releases, and subtle shifts in official language rarely happen by accident. They often signal the start of a new campaign. Think back to the run-up to the Iraq War, when carefully timed leaks and official statements created a drumbeat for conflict, or to the financial crisis of 2008, when coordinated central bank actions signaled a new phase in the global economy. Next, pay close attention to changes in legislation and public policy. When sweeping new laws are introduced overnight, or massive budget reallocations are announced with little warning, these are rarely coincidences. They are the fingerprints of private negotiations and shifting alliances behind closed doors. The most important clues often lie in what is not said, in the gaps and silences of official statements. For example, when a government suddenly increases its defense budget by billions, or quietly extends conscription to younger or older citizens, it is often in response to pressures the public has yet to fully understand. Consider who is present and who is absent when power is being brokered. The recent summit between Trump and Putin in Budapest, pointedly excluding European leaders, is no mere diplomatic slight. It is an unmistakable message. The old order is fracturing. If your leaders are not invited to the table, your nation may soon find itself on the menu. In geopolitics, place and presence reveal who truly wields influence. Recall the Sykes-Picot Agreement of 1916, when Britain and France divided up the Middle East without consulting the people who lived there, or the division of Korea at the end of the Second World War. A single line drawn on a map, with consequences that still shape the world today. Monitor technological and tactical shifts on the battlefield. In places like Pokrovsk, the sudden dominance of drone surveillance, the introduction of new artillery systems, and the desperate logistics of evacuating the wounded all herald a new era of conflict. When established strategies collapse overnight, power can change hands before anyone is ready, catching even the most prepared nations flat-footed. Think of the way that cyber attacks have rewritten the rules of modern espionage, or how the introduction of tanks and airplanes in the First World War changed the very nature of battle. Broaden your perspective beyond your borders. Relying solely on your own country's media or government narrative is a trap. Instead, deliberately seek out viewpoints from both sides of every conflict and listen to voices from the global South. Often, the clearest analysis comes from those either least invested in the status quo or most eager to reshape it. During the Cold War, for example, understanding the non-aligned movement gave a more complete picture than simply following the rhetoric from Washington or Moscow. Most importantly, take an active role in the conversation. Share your country's perspective in the comments, distribute this video, and debate these developments with friends and family. By pooling knowledge and challenging assumptions, we make ourselves less vulnerable to manipulation. Informed communities are far harder to deceive. When people in Tunisia, Ukraine, or Hong Kong mobilized using social media, it was the collective sharing of information that often made the difference between confusion and clarity. Failing to adapt to this new reality means risking everything from economic turmoil to sudden political shocks, or worse, being swept aside by the next wave of global change. The stakes are immense. Your nation's security, your financial future, and your grasp of how the world truly works all depend on your vigilance. So, the real question is, will you passively watch history reshape itself, or will you learn to read its signals before the next move is made? The answer is not predetermined. Every generation faces its own turning point. Think of the fall of the Berlin Wall, or the expansion of the European Union after the Cold War. Those who paid attention, who organized, who demanded a voice, helped shape the outcome. Those who did not were left at the mercy of events they neither understood nor controlled. With the ground shifting beneath our feet, recognizing these signals is only the beginning. Next, let's explore how ordinary citizens, regardless of nationality, can turn insight into real-world resilience. First, build your own information network. Subscribe to independent news sources, both domestic and international. Follow analysts with a track record of accuracy, not just those who confirm your biases. Create groups, online or in person, where people can share updates and debate interpretations. When communities in Singapore, Iceland, and South Korea faced crises, it was the strength of their local networks that often made the difference between panic and preparedness. Second, focus on practical readiness. In times of uncertainty, those who plan ahead are less vulnerable to shock. This does not mean building a bunker or hoarding supplies, but rather staying alert to economic signals, such as changes in energy prices, food imports, or employment trends, that might indicate coming instability. For example, during the oil crisis of the 1970s, families who diversified their heating sources or learned new skills weathered the storm better than those who waited for help from above. Third, get involved in civil society. Support organizations that advocate for transparency, accountability, and public debate. Attend local meetings, write to your representatives, and demand explanations for major policy shifts. When Poland's solidarity movement began as a simple labor protest, it grew into a force that changed the course of history, because ordinary people refused to stay silent. Fourth, teach others to question, not just to consume. Help younger generations develop the habit of asking why, not just what. When Estonian citizens learned to spot misinformation campaigns, they became more resilient to outside manipulation, turning a potential weakness into a national strength. Finally, remember that the future is not written in secret meetings or behind closed doors. It is written by the countless small decisions made by millions of ordinary people. By refusing to accept narratives at face value, by demanding a seat at the table, by insisting that your voice matters, you become the ultimate author of your own fate. We have traced a line from a rare confession by a British general to a covert meeting in Budapest, and finally to the battered streets of Pokrovsk. Each event signals that the world order is not just shifting, it is being quietly rewritten, often without those most affected even present to object. In backrooms, the fate of an entire continent is being debated. Yet for millions, their future is being mapped by unfamiliar hands. If you stay silent, you surrender your right to shape your nation's path. The stories you accept or resist will determine your country's safety, wealth, and standing in the world. Missing this moment means letting invisible forces redraw borders, not only on maps, but in the core of your daily life. But silence is not your only option. Your questions, doubts, and insights are the last lines of defense against decisions made in shadow. Will you accept the headlines as given? Or will you challenge them, searching for the deeper truths hidden underneath? Now, I want to know where you stand. Which country are you watching from? What role should your nation play in this evolving global game? Share your view below and invite others to speak, because only when every voice is raised does a true global conversation begin. Remember, ignorance is a luxury the world can no longer afford. This turning point will shape not only governments, but the world your children inherit. Use your voice while it still matters. The next move is yours.